welcome to Between the Rows. I'm Ed White, your host this week. Later in the show, we'll hear about a novel set 50 years ago in the midst of a fraught situation in the Soviet Union, and it's all about grain, money, and international politics. In a minute, we'll hear about 4-H volunteer Sandra Duchak and the 42 years she has dedicated to the organization, and just what motivates her dedication. But first, a word from our sponsor.
You know, not all nitrogen works as hard as I do. My ESN polymer coating means I can stay out in the field longer, up to 80 days. Those other guys? First hot wind or heavy rain and they're out. They're scared of soil bacteria and standing water too. But not me. It's why ESN is the leading controlled release nitrogen in broadacre agriculture. See for yourself. Just check out smartnitrogen.com.
Worthy endeavors and organizations like 4-H rely upon endless, often lifelong commitments from volunteers. What you'll hear next is the Manitoba Co-operators Geraldine Witchers speaking with longtime volunteer Sandra Duchak about her commitment and what has inspired her 4 decades of service to 4-H.
I'm curious, I guess, to start. Were you a 4-H member when you were a kid as well?
I was never a 4-H member. I didn't have that opportunity, but I love 4-H.
Okay, so then how did you get involved as a volunteer?
When my daughter turned 8 and was eligible to join the 4-H club, and we had a newly reformed 4-H club at Gainsborough, and so I took her there to join her, and it took me right from there.
What's your role now as a volunteer?
I am the head leader of Gainsborough 4-H. I am a representative on the area council, and on area council right now, I am the chairperson of the communications event. And I spent a 4-year term, 2 terms actually, on the Manitoba 4-H Council.
I'd like to ask, what kept you volunteering for so long?
I love to be with the members and watch their achievements, see the smiles on their faces and things like that. I started out as a leader for my children, and now I am the leader for my grandchildren. And I just love to assist other people.
I had one of the questions I'd asked was some of your favorite memories or stories from your time as a volunteer. I was wondering what that brought to mind.
That brought to mind participating in the Portage Industrial Exhibition on Rally Days. We had to march with our whole club in front of the grandstand. That was always fun, except when it was 99 above. It was a little warm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by that? I'm not familiar.
All the clubs in our area, in the Portage district area, and Treeherne, all those different places, Holland, all over Manitoba, used to come at the Portage Fair time. And on Rally Day, all the clubs would, as within their club uniforms, they would march with their banners in front of the grandstand. And there was always a parade winner picked out and the runner-up and things like that. But it was just so nice to see everybody in uniform marching together, smiling, having a good time.
So my next question would be, how has the club changed or evolved in the time that you've been a volunteer there?
More technology, for sure. And the use of social media has really changed things in the clubs. Whereas, because of this COVID, we've had many virtual project meetings, and it's just like the kids are more scientific.
This kind of, what you said there kind of tied into my other question which was, do you see a difference in the kids from when you started to now in terms of what they're interested in, or maybe what backgrounds they come from, that kind of thing?
I think the kids are still very interested. Anybody that joins a club has an interest in learning, and they especially like to, some of the members, to take the communication skills because they know it's an asset when they do a job interview or do their resumes. The diversity I see is mostly with so many immigrants coming to Canada, we have a lot of diverse nationalities now. And that also is awesome example in a foods project. You can get those different nationalities. I had a food project and I had a little girl from, I think she was from Africa or India. And I asked her if her mother would come and show us how to make one of their ethnic foods. And she did. It was awesome. Just
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think 4-H is important to kids today? What do you think it does for them?
I think 4-H is very important to kids today. It gives them self-confidence and makes them reliable, respectable people. They honor their commitments. And I think it just makes them a whole rounder person.
Is your intention to keep on volunteering kind of as long as you're able?
It is. I would totally miss 4-H if I wasn't able to continue.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
Keeps you young, keeps you involved with the members of the community. And a 4-H club is just like one big family. And it doesn't matter if it's just your club or whoever's club. Everybody's always friendly to each other and always willing to help. We've had in lots of times at our club where we've had many junior members and not too many senior members. And those senior members will mentor the younger ones to teach them how to be a treasurer, to be a president, to be a secretary. And it's just wonderful to see that camaraderie along with the intellectual aid that they give each other.
I think you mentioned that your grandkids are part of the club now.
Yes.
Have you seen it generations of the same family come through as you've been volunteering over years?
Yes. Many of the members that I had when I first started 4-H, I am now teaching their children.
What does that feel like?
It's kind of cool because you know what the parents were like, and they were always good members, and the members themselves now are also, and it's just kind of nice to tie it all together.
That was Geraldine Witchers of the Manitoba Co-operator speaking with Sandra Duchak. Now, a special feature brought to you by our sponsor, Nutrien ESN.
Hi, I'm Kevin Jaworski here today with Todd Latimer to talk about Nutrien ESN Smart Nitrogen. So hi, Todd. Welcome to Between the Rows.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So, Todd, we've heard all about rising fertilizer costs for 2022. What kind of price spikes are we seeing out there?
Great question. It's a hot topic these days. We've seen kind of just in general, I would say on almost every fertilizer out there, probably from where we were a year ago, doubling in price due to a number of reasons globally and domestically here in North America.
So, Todd, this might have farmers reconsidering their fertilizer spending to try and cut costs. Are they at risk of creating false economies?
Yes, Kevin, I think there is a potential there for that exactly. You can't really save your way to prosperity, but you can still get decent yields. But I think if the opportunity is there, you want to ensure that the money you're spending, especially this year on fertilizer, is not at risk to be lost. So I think ESN would provide that as kind of an insurance for some of these farmers, so they wouldn't lose their nitrogen through volatilization, denitrification, or leaching. But otherwise, you potentially could lose, depending what type of soil type you're on. There's potential to lose up to 40 or 50% of your investment, and at today's costs, as you were mentioning earlier, that's significant money for sure at risk. So. And not to mention, you'd have to probably come back and have application costs and nitrogen added on again if you had to go over the crop again later in the growing season. So there is some risk there for sure.
You mentioned losing, nitrogen, and basically, the question that I have is, what do farmers have for protecting their fertilizer investment and hopefully not losing as much nitrogen?
Yeah, that's right, Kevin. There's different options. I think, the basic the basic option out there that we would want every grower, I think, to start with is with the 4 R's. The right rate, the right product or source, the right timing, and the right place where they're going to place that fertilizer. So it all starts with that. And then you kind of graduate from that to, I think, the next level up would be enhanced efficiency fertilizers. There's different inhibitors. There's slow release. We have a controlled release product, things like that help keep the fertilizer in that form as long as possible and available to the plant. So that would be probably the second step, I would say.
So then, do some of these protection products make more sense than others in this environment?
Definitely, yeah. You definitely want to work with your local agronomist or crop consultant, retailer, whoever you traditionally use, to determine what's best for your fit in your geography and environment. But broadly speaking, there's if you're going to put this, we'd recommend putting the fertilizer in the soil so it's not potentially surface applied. You'll have more risk to volatilization where nitrogen's lost up into the atmosphere. If it's banded in the soil, there's still risks of losing it to leaching with heavy rainfall, or to losing it to denitrification, where you get those puddles and ponds in your field and it gases off up into the atmosphere that way.
So can you tell me just a bit more about ESN?
Absolutely, yeah. So ESN, those 3 types of nitrogen loss that I just mentioned, it protects against all 3. So whether it's on the surface, or whether it's banded in the ground, it will protect against volatilization, denitrification, and leaching. And so it has a polymer coating. It's basically a urea granule with a thin polymer coating on it that protects that urea. So as moisture in the soil diffuses into that granule and the temperature in the soil warms up, with the growing season, it slowly turns into urea solution and releases that back out into the soil to feed the crops. So that's why we call it kind of a controlled release, because it's responsive to the temperature in the soil.
And what kind of ROI does it then offer to farmers?
Again, it depends kind of on the year and the amount of rainfall and a number of factors. Last year, with it being dry, there wasn't a lot of nitrogen loss in Western Canada, unfortunately, but there wasn't a lot used, sadly, because of that. So there was a lot of residual nitrogen that we've seen because of the drought. But if in a typical year where there's good rainfall and adequate moisture and good warm growing conditions for the crop, then we'd like to shoot generally for a 3-to-1 return on investment. We've seen it, as I say, in years like last year where it was very dry, where there wasn't a return on investment, but we've seen it as high as 7 times return on investment in wet years too. So it can depend on it, but 3-to-1 is kind of a rule of thumb that we like to shoot for in our account.
So if farmers are looking to get more information about ESN, where can they go to get that information, or how do they go about doing that?
There's a few different options. Like if they want to just kind of look for data, trial information in their areas on different crops that we've had over the past 20 years that we've been doing this with this product, they can go to our website, which is smartnitrogen.com. And there's tons of information on there. There's also contact information on there. They can ask an agronomist questions on there. There's also contact information on that website as well for our, we have a couple of marketing reps in Western Canada that can give them any kind of information they may want as well too. So all that information's on the website. I think it's a good place to start, or even their local retailer. Chances are the product, as I say, has been around long enough that they could help them out and guide them the right way, or connect them with our marketing reps too.
Well, excellent. That was some very, very insightful information today. So thank you very much for joining us today, Todd, and appreciate you coming on Between the Rows.
You bet. Thanks for your time, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
50 years ago, the eyes of the world weren't on Russia and Ukraine, but they should have been. A massive drought had wiped out the crops in those 2 key grain-producing regions of the Soviet Union, and hunger loomed. How the Soviets managed to clear out U.S. grain stocks at a price they could pay is an amazing bit of agricultural markets history. It's a story Russ Crawford, an agricultural risk management consultant and writer, decided to tell, and he has, in his new novel, Limit Up. I spoke with Russ, and this is our conversation. What's really interesting here is that you have chosen to set a novel inside the Great Grain Robbery. And I was wondering if you could explain, I guess, why that part of commodity history that a lot of people in the grain trade know about, but a lot of people outside probably don't, and even the younger people in farming and the grain trade might not know about it. Why did you decide to take a look back at this historic event in the commodity markets?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I think, one, it's an interesting story, but more importantly, I think it was a pivotal time in agriculture. You know, when you look back at that event, grain prices, commodity market prices never went back to those levels of that time. It really was a shift in agriculture into a place where we could live with lower stocks. We started to recognize the power of food in the market and you know, the potential for the opportunity. And the 70s were a fantastic decade for grain markets in general. And so I felt like it was a really interesting story. And as I said, I was there for those early days, and I remember the event. And, you know, you write about what you know. And so this was really a story that was familiar to me, and I knew where to look. But I thought it would be interesting for people, both in my age group, to look back on that time and remember those events, but also, as you said, for younger readers to, who may have heard of this or may not have, to learn a little bit about the history of our industry. So those are kind of the drivers.
So for younger people than us who have no memory of this event or even having been heard all the talk about it in the years since that's faded a bit, could you give like a 20-second summary for the sake of our listeners?
Of the story, you mean?
No, of the Great Grain Robbery itself.
Oh, okay. Well, in 1972, Russia had a massive crop failure. In fact, all of the Eastern Europe did, and they were really, really in trouble. They felt like they needed to go to a marketplace that really wasn't very friendly to them and buy 30 million tons of grain. And so it came down on the shoulders of one team to try and make that happen without driving futures markets higher and exhausting their treasuries. It was a major event in agriculture history, in my view.
And in the end, the Soviet Union didn't starve to death that year, which was a possibility that millions faced hunger when early on in the year.
Exactly. A disaster averted, if you like. There was, coincidentally, 30 million tons of grain sitting in storage in the United States that had been building up. As production there was bountiful, and they just didn't have the markets for it. So it was a place in a time when, the demand for food overrode politics, and two countries that were, not very friendly toward each other managed to make a deal.
Yeah, if I remember those days, we were threatening to nuke each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All kinds of threats, just back from the 60s, but it carried over. It was the Cold War, and it was a difficult time for the two major nations of Russia and the United States.
So you've decided to make this a novel rather than nonfiction. You didn't just do this as a straight history book. What was your thinking on why you would approach it from that perspective as opposed to just like a straight old history book?
Well, that's kind of been done. There's a couple of books out there, sort of corporate histories of this event. Cargill has one called Going Global, and Continental commissioned one that was called Amber Waves of Grain, which was reissued under the title The Great Grain Robbery. So I used those as resources, but I thought it would be a more interesting read to tell it from the eyes of the participants. And so I zeroed in on one Russian trader that this character is fashioned after, and a young Cargill rookie trader who's just coming into his own in terms of grain marketing. So these are the two main characters that work their way through this story, and you see it through their eyes, and I think that makes it a bit more interesting. and you start to see the characters. Like, there was a lot of people involved in this, and the book covers off quite a few of them, from the editor of Million Baking News, a deep throat character who was revealing information along the way, the Soviet Politburo and the Cargill management. So that, but individually, these people and how they were reacting and the interplay. Most people don't really understand about commodity markets and what they do and what they're about, and how how they influence the commodity markets, how they influence the price of food. So I thought it was an opportunity to tell the commodity market story as well, and feature the Chicago Board of Trade as a main venue in the story, and just tell people about the industry and make it interesting enough for people to learn something at the same time.
It's got a bit of a feel of a spy thriller.
I tried for that. I mean, even the cover has got a bit of a mystery to it, and that's the idea, is to say, what's he doing there, and what's that tornado in the background, and there's no wheat going beside the Kremlin. There's a lot of inconsistencies of reality in the cover, but they're all meaningful, and so it is a mystery, because as you're reading through it, if you know the history, you know what happened, but you don't know how.
And how did you do your research on the Soviet side?
I got really lucky. I found a fellow who is currently the advisor to the president of Export Club. I was connected to him through a mutual friend on LinkedIn, and I reached out to him, and he got back to me, and he said, I knew all those people. I was at Export Club back in the 70s. And he started to send me information on, the Russian side of the story. Who were the good guys? Where were the challenges? What was going on at the Kremlin during that time? So I didn't just make that up. I had a really good source there, and so much of this story is based on eyewitnesses. The Continental Grain guy was, Mike Laserson was the guy in New York that answered the phone when the Russians called. So, and Dick Dawson in Canada was part of the story from the Canadian side, much smaller, of course, than the U.S. But I got some people who were actually there and involved in the event. I was on the periphery. I'd been with Cargill 1 year when this happened, so I certainly wasn't privy to, the nuances of what was happening in the trade. But these other fellows were, so I got some good, solid intel.
And, while Cargill and Continental are, central to the history, this did affect Canada and Western Canadian farmers, whether it's direct or indirect. What kind of element shows up from this story in how this affected us up here?
There's a fairly interesting segment about the Canadian Wheat Board and the main character's relationship with the Wheat Board and his relationship with Canada in general. We were a small part of that total amount of grain they bought, but they did buy an exceptionally large amount of grain from Canada that year, and they continued to do that, and they did it before, even in the 60s, when they had a shortfall. Canada was a regular and good, reliable partner for the Soviet Union. And so, that was the sort of the groundwork of that relationship. But, the story of what happened to commodity markets afterwards affects every farmer in the world. And looking at the charts and seeing where that market went, the wheat market in particular, after that, certainly had a very large effect on Canada, because, we're a wheat exporting nation. And so the price is critical to Canadian farmers, and they saw that, they benefit in the results of this transaction and higher prices that ensued.
Growing up in Saskatchewan, I certainly saw that with a lot of money flowing into farm country outside of Regina, where I was from.
Big time in the 70s. Those were the heydays for farmers. They had, better revenues than they'd ever experienced before. There was volatility that came along with it, price volatility. And I thought it was crazy back then, but, when you compare it to the volatility in markets today, it was still rather small. But, you grow as the markets change and evolve, and your tolerance for risk changes. But at least there was a good, vibrant market available for farmers to be, to capture those benefits. But that rippled down. It wasn't just farmers. I mean, it was the handling and transportation industry. The going on underneath that is part of the establishment of commodity market pricing.
And if someone wants to get the book, where do they go? Where do we find Limit Up?
Well, I'm self-published on this, so it's only available on Amazon right now. You can get either an ebook or a paperback copy. I'm working with Ingram Spark, which is the book producing organization that supplies the major bookstores. I have my first book out through Ingram Spark, so I'm just repeating my steps there and making it will be available there, and then hopefully some of the smaller bookstores will be able to order it, and fill orders and that sort of thing.
Well, that's great, Russ. Thanks very much for explaining this all. It's a unique bit of commodity market history, of Cold War history, of an era that I guess is half a century old, but really no less fascinating today than it was then.
It is, and I've got a website. It's at www.limitup.ca, and you can see there's a really neat picture of the Chicago Board of Trade changing over the years, and how that market evolved from the pit to the electronic trading floor or electronic trading boards and that sort of thing to completely online trading now, and the evolution of that industry. But the market carries on, and people access it today just like they did back then. So that's a story in itself, is the commodity markets and the industry that's a big part of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, especially for someone like me who's got an interest in this. But I imagine for all sorts of people who are involved in the industry, from farming to all the many other parts of the industry, this is an interesting place that we've evolved a lot from.
I'm getting a lot of positive feedback on my LinkedIn announcement, which is really encouraging. That there's people from all walks of life that are really looking forward to reading this, and so I hope that it does get well spread out there.
Well, thanks again, Russ, for joining us today and explaining Limit Up. That was Russ Crawford speaking with me. That's all for this week. Please join us again next week for another edition of Between the Rows. I'm Ed White.
Not all nitrogen works as hard as I do. My ESN polymer coating means I can stay out in the field longer, up to 80 days. Those other guys? First hot wind or heavy rain and they're out. They're scared of soil bacteria and standing water too. But not me. It's why ESN is the leading controlled release nitrogen in broadacre agriculture. See for yourself. Just check out smartnitrogen.com.